Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Tracy McCarthy. Welcome to our discussion on DAHOMEY or DAHOMEY or DANHOMEY, its meaning and migration. Hopefully, you were able to take in the earlier discussion on the kingdom of Wida, Zwida, Hueda, all of those various iterations there on the west coast of Africa. And we have moved on now after resolving a number of issues with respect to that kingdom. We've moved on to deal directly with Dahomey. And so what you will see in terms of the meaning of Dahomey, that the meanings are vast. And so this is not some simple dynamic with respect to this particular kingdom. You're going to see diverse meanings for Dahomey, very similar to what you saw simply with Ouida. You're also going to see these migrations in terms of this kingdom, because remember, the kingdom pretty much dissolved. However, this kingdom has resurrected itself in different ways. With respect to Dahomey, we see that there is quite a bit of migration and this resurrecting dynamic. And there's also an overarching theme that seems to apply to Dahomey. And there seems to be some pride that was taken in having this sort of identity, and it was a revolving around destruction. And so a large part of the identity of Dahomey is this idea of destruction. And so you have Dahomey meaning Da, and there is Dahomey the people, and you have the people in Africa, but Dahomey is also associated with Tibet, in addition to the Eurasian connection and then the Asian connection. So there's quite a bit going on here with respect to Dahomey. You're also going to see the branching out of Dahomey and where that branching out ended up. And so you also see here that this Da is also known as Dab-Iha. And so this Da, the deity Da, is also known as Dab-Iha and also understood as the serpent that we discussed. But again, the overarching theme with Dahomey, whether you are referring to Da or Dab-Iha or this little known serpent, is this theme of destruction. And you saw the manifestation of that with respect to that kingdom of Ouida or Judah or Zwida, and that was on the west coast of Africa. And so let's look at this first correlation with Dahomey or Da or Dab-Iha. Interestingly, it is associated with what is known as the Black Madonna. And you can see it's this particular Black Madonna that has the association. And so you see the phenotype with respect to this Black Madonna. You see the affect in terms of the face with respect to this Black Madonna, and then you see what might be understood as tribal marks with respect to this particular Black Madonna, and you see that the final name for this Black Madonna is Dahomey. Now, this Black Madonna in particular is not simply a what you would understand as a Christian Black Madonna. This is a syncretized Black Madonna. And you can take some time to read this. This is a Wikipedia entry related to this particular entity, this Dahomey Black Madonna. And you can see that this Black Madonna is also associated with Yoruba religion, with Fon religion, and also Aksum. Now, this is interesting because Aksum actually is a variant of Aksum. And if you're not familiar with the Aksumite Empire, you might want to check that out. But you can see here that these are just variants of the same word, the same construct. And so you can see with Aksum, you see the obelisk associated with Aksum. And so you see different views of it there. But Aksum and Aksum essentially are variants of the same thing. And so in this, you see sort of this merging of spirituality from the east part of Africa and the west part of Africa, remembering though that those on the west coast of Africa were not originally there. And so there was this migration coming from different directions to that west coast. And then you see a song associated with this Aksum, Aksum. And you also see the relationship between this and a connection to Babylon. And so you can see Dahomey, the construct of Dahomey, it has many tentacles. And you can see here when you're looking at Babili, you can see Babel, Babylon, it all goes together. So it's all the same thing. It's all associated. And you can see here when you see Babylon in one language looking at Yoruba, you can have Babyloni, and you can also have that Babili that goes along with that song that we were just looking at. And here you can see those words in sequence. And so you can see the Babili and the Aksum, and this is looking at the Amharic, and you can also see with the Arabic there. Okay, so moving along with this Dahomey identity, meaning, and migration, next we have Dahomey and the relationship between Dahomey and Tibet. And you see here that there's an indication that this name Dahomey, which we saw was associated with or meant Dab-Iha. You see here that in terms of this book, Buddhism of Tibet, that Dab-Iha is understood as a war god. Again, this dynamic of destruction. And so Dahomey really is, that name is associated with desolation. That name is associated with destruction. And here you see another manifestation of it, and the name Dab-Iha is associated with a ritualized way of dealing with meat, like at a butcher shop. And now we're going to look at a different form of migration that may give rise to quite a bit of imitation. And first up, we see this plantation that is understood as the Dahomey plantation. This plantation processed rubber. So this is a rubber plantation. And even though the kingdom no longer exists, you see this name and people group, in terms of Dahomey, traveling to different places. And so the first place that we're looking at that this name traveled to is Suriname. And so you have Dahomey in Suriname. You know, and a big part of imperialism and colonialism involves this dynamic of people moving to another place and then renaming the new place after themselves. And so you will have a Dahomey Suriname when clearly there was no Dahomey Suriname before Dahomey Suriname arrived there. Okay, and so you have this dynamic also with respect to the transatlantic slave trade. Now, Dahomey was instrumental in the transatlantic slave trade in a very destructive and what would be considered a very barbaric manner. But what you have here is the movement of the name across the Atlantic, and you see manifestations of Dahomey with respect to cotton, planting cotton, and slavery, and cotton plantations involving slavery. So we're going to look at the specifics of that. Now, after Dahomey is involved with these genocidal dynamics that were going on, the transatlantic slave trade, you see the name Dahomey pop up in no other place but Mississippi. And so there is an actual land space known as the Dahomey Plantation. And you also see that there's the manifestation of Yoruba also. It's a people group very involved in the transatlantic slave trade. There is no real clear line of demarcation between many groups on the west coast of Africa. But you also see this particular group planting roots and establishing its own kingdom in the United States. And so then you have this plantation that is established with the name of this kingdom of Dahomey in Mississippi. And then not only do we have this kingdom's name popping up as a name for a plantation, we have this kingdom being established as an actual town in Mississippi. So this kingdom doesn't exist in Africa anymore. It exists in the United States. And the story that goes along with this entire plantation dynamic is that the owner of the plantation decided to name this plantation after the kingdom of Dahomey because that was the land from which the enslaved people came. Okay, so you can see here that this plantation had 9,875 acres in Bolivar County, Mississippi. This included 20 tenant houses and land for planting rice, cotton, wheat, oats, and soybean. Now, if it was not enough to have a Dahomey plantation, slave plantation, then an entire town named Dahomey. Dahomey was further honored by naming a wildlife refuge after this place and people. And so this name with this very destructive history is elevated yet again. So this kingdom becomes the name for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's a National Wildlife Refuge in Mississippi for migratory birds, and it's Dahomey. And this is interesting because if you recall, with respect to that kingdom of Ouida, the kingdom of Ouida, according to one narrative, there have been so many narratives about these dynamics on the west coast of Africa, but this kingdom was supposed to be named after this Ouida bird. And so you have here that Dahomey, aka Ouida, is serving as the refuge for migratory birds. And here you can see additional information on the Dahomey National Wildlife Refuge. And here's another depiction of the wildlife refuge. It's interesting because it's in a forested wetland area. And here's additional information related to the Dahomey National Wildlife Refuge. And here you can see Dahomey on this map. What's noteworthy about this is on this one map, you see Dahomey spelled in two different ways. And so you see Dahomey with the D-A-H-O-M-E-Y, and then Dahomey with no E. And so this wraps up this session of looking at Dahomey, the meaning, and the migration. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.